So we'll cover some fundamental things. Can religion be a science? Or can religion be considered to be a science? And today, the word religion has a flavor of unpopularity, particularly in European regions where formal religions have found a membership decline. And probably the reason for that is because people don't see the automatic compatibility between science as it is at the moment and religion. They seem to be somehow opposites. And in the mind of young people, this has become a misunderstood concept, that there are two opposing forces. You either believe in a religion or you believe in science. And the reason for this assumed incompatibility is that religion has come with a tradition behind it where doctrines and dogmas and books and temples and churches are but primary details. And you'll know from the original quotation that the series began with, that Swami Vivekananda puts it the other way around, that they are secondary details. And so religious membership comes with some why questions. And I always remember something I keep telling you, many examples before. There was a Havan, a very elaborate fire ceremony, the oldest Vedic ritualistic ceremony that there is the fire ceremony. And in gathering all the ingredients, one ingredient seemed to be missing. They were looking for it everywhere. It was a black cat. And because in this particular ritual, for a particular purpose, there had to be samgri and ghee and flowers and coconuts and all these things. And there had to be a black cat sitting in the corner. This was part of the essential ritual. But one intelligent person, questioning person, asked, I wonder why did you ever have a black, what's the meaning of a black cat in the corner? And they traced the history back some generations, and it turns out that when they were doing this, a black cat wandered around for the first time and sat in the corner. Thereafter, everybody thought what is essential to the ritual is a black cat has to sit in the corner. And I don't know how you make a black cat sit in the corner, but anyway, maybe it was the original black cat and it passed away and they artificially stuffed it with something and set it in the corner. So it shows how very often superstition can creep in, and Swami Vivekananda in his Raja Yoga, because this is essentially a study of this book, Raja Yoga, the science of religion, he mentions two categories of people. The scientific-minded people who are not prepared to investigate all these phenomena that are claimed by religious people or spiritual people of experience. And they are more culpable, he says, than the uneducated who, through superstition, accept everything in a spirit of blind faith, not questioning. Teenagehood has this great advantage. It allows for questioning in a rebellious fashion. What, where, why, and when, and how. These are scientific questions. But science today is or can be a form of scientism, that is, a form of religion itself, because nobody likes to change their opinion. Once you've invested your time and energy in investigating a certain hypothesis, you want to stay with this hypothesis. And although one of the great standards put out by Karl Popper, a great philosopher of science, that every model you produce, every hypothesis, every theory has to be falsifiable. This is one of the tests of validity. In other words, we leave ourselves open for any theory or any model to be proved false. And so every experiment is designed to make sure that it is testable or tested to the extent that it can be falsifiable. But you see, today we live in a world of speculation which is more like metaphysics. In order to get round awkward problems, it is proposed that there are many worlds, many universes, just to avoid the awkward questions of causality and the awkward questions of what is cosmology today, and what is described now as the fine-tuning problem. That there are certain sets of conditions, certain parameters, certain constants, over 20 of them, without which, and they're like fine hairline borders, if you will, or conditions, and if you violate any one of these, we don't have an existence, or there's some disaster in the universe. And then there's the idea that the laws of nature are eternal. So that by the 19th century, when people were having a good military coup, as it were, against God and religion, they did away with the creator lawgiver, but they retained the laws. So illogically, the laws are immutable. They did away with the lawgiver, but maintained the eternal laws completely irrationally. It's just a dogma which has pretty much been accepted. And then cosmology itself is an awkward area where invented physics has to be brought out in order simply to solve problems. And there are many critics today in modern science that say, you know what? Much of science in this area of physics and cosmology is mere speculation. And yet the speculation has come out in textbooks as factual. Big Bang is a fact. Every cosmologist, more or less, will refer to the standard model, meaning there was a Big Bang and an awkward singularity. And before that singularity, there was no time, no space. And we find this echoes of this in the arrangement of the ancient Vedic schools. And so the very origin of the word for the absolute Brahman suggests a surge that spreads, as it were, and expands infinitely. A sudden burst of something coming about. And so Swami Vivekananda was not aware of all these modern speculations and discoveries. Nevertheless, the science of his time was ignorant of the various facts of the phenomena that are worth investigating and are still not fully investigated today. People are now starting to question. For example, what is consciousness? This is an outstanding scientific question. Previously, it wasn't a scientific question at all. From Descartes, he separated things into mind and matter. You know, we can jokingly say, I don't mind and you don't matter. But this duality was brought about. And unfortunately, that has led to deism and ultimately a clockwork universe where God is unnecessary, the kind of God, creator God. But Sankhya, on which yoga philosophy is built, doesn't have such a God. So if you ask the Sankhya, why did God make an awkward world? The Sankhya philosopher will say, don't ask me this question. I don't believe in a God like that. I don't have such a thing. Then how do you explain the world as it is, in its bad condition? Oh, that is because of your wrong thinking. So during the course of this evening, it would be helpful to walk around the geography of existence according to Sankhya philosophy, which the yogis adopt, the yoga philosophy adopts. And this kind of yoga contained in Raja Yoga, royal yoga, is really the science of religion. We got to a place where Swami Vivekananda in his introduction is saying, he says, in the first place, if you analyze all the various religions of the world, you will find that these are divided into two classes, those with a book and those without a book. Those with a book are the strongest and have the largest number of followers, and those without books have mostly died out. And the few new ones have very small followings. Yet in all of them we find one consensus of opinion, that the truths they teach are the results of the experiences of particular persons. And now here we have the first clue about the science of religion. Science of religion, all sciences are based on somebody's direct experience. We take a simple example. Chemically, water is 1 part hydrogen, or 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. Somebody was clever enough and interested enough to analyze what are the molecular components and discover this proportion. You take liquid hydrogen, you put it in certain conditions, heat, Bunsen burner, and you evaporate what the mixture of hydrogen and oxygen mixed together as gases, and eventually the condensation you find at the other end, you taste it. It tastes very much like what comes out of your tap. It's water. So we know that this proportion is correct because somebody experienced it. Now today there is so much information and knowledge. We are not specialists in any area, maybe in 1 or 2 areas, and we have to rely on people's experiences. And so the science in the books about Big Bang and all the rest of all the other cosmology, we assume is correct. We assume people have done an appropriate experiment. And we don't have to do the experiment again. But then we'll never know for sure. And so the first record has to be there of somebody's experience. Scripture is really a record of somebody's experience. The books that religions have validate a certain experience because somebody says, I have seen, I know. So I'm not just talking about a God of religion. I have seen. This was one of the young Narendra's key questions when he visited Ramakrishna, previously going around to all the so-called spiritual authorities of the day. Have you seen God? If you say yes, then I'll listen to you. But if you say no or not quite or something like that, I'm afraid you're off my list, you're on my consultation list. I'm looking for somebody who says directly yes. Then with a skeptic mind still, I will listen to you. He goes to Ramakrishna, have you seen God? Ramakrishna immediately says, and laughs a little bit, of course. Yes, not only have I seen God, I see him now, sitting here. One person in the yoga conference in Switzerland that I recently attended asked me, have you seen God? And I evaded the question, but I should have answered, yes. It's the one asking the question. That's God's face. You should be able to see God's face everywhere. You should be able to recognize the validity of the divine expressed as the glory of the entire universe. That is the culmination of your vision. And once you see that within, you see it everywhere. So Ramakrishna answered like that. Of course, not only do I see God, or I see him now, and I see him more real than you sitting there. And not only that, but the important substatement, you also can see him. So the opportunity for all of us is there, because if the books say one person has seen, then surely everybody can see. It must be our common experience. And so the Christian, he says, asks you to believe in his religion, to believe in Christ and to believe in him as the incarnation of God, to believe in a God, in a soul, in a better state of that soul. And if I ask him for a reason, because surely we should ask somebody for a reason, why? He says he believes in them. But if you go to the fountainhead of Christianity, you'll find that it is based upon experience. Christ said he saw God. The disciples said they felt God, and so forth. And similarly in Buddhism, it is Buddha's experience, and he experienced certain truths, and he saw them and came in contact with them and preached them to the world. So with the Hindus, in their books, the writers who are called rishis or sages declare they experienced certain truths, and these they preach. And so it is clear that all the religions of the world have been built upon that one universal and adamantine foundation of all our knowledge, direct experience. So in elucidating the principles of Hinduism, I normally tell people there are 5 things. Firstly, the authority of the Vedas, belief in a supreme principle, and belief that the inner entity, fundamentally the base that is you in depth is either connected or one with this Supreme, and that the universe runs on causality and therefore is eternal, and that there are four ways, according to the propensity of the mind, four aspects of the mind that lend themselves to expression in four directions, four approaches. One of which, of course, is the subject of meditation. And then I tell them, but the key, the real approach, the real validation of all of these is direct experience. Your own direct experience validates it. That means we can take off blind belief. We can take off all the criticism that skeptics give religious people. And hardly anybody in the debating world mentions this direct experience. They might talk about subjective experience. But you can't prove subjective experience. If you had a dream last night and you said that I was standing on a mountain and a huge eagle came and swept me off my feet and took me up to heaven, and this was my dream, what does it mean? There's no way I know that this dream is true other than your own testimony of it. But the fact that everybody dreams means there's a common experience called dream. And so I'll take for granted what is there, and I'll use this inference. So the validation of all our knowledge really is this credible testimony, somebody's direct experience. This is true in science as well. And secondly, inference. You look over a hill and you see smoke. You haven't seen fire, but you infer, okay, there must be fire. There's no smoke without fire, I often say that I don't smoke except when I'm on fire, and then I blow a lot, So create a model. What is the model? The model is this spiritual journey with the scripture as your guide. Come on, do this, X, Y, Z. Because scripture is like the manual, kind of handbook. What to do, what not to do. It's not addressed to God, it's addressed to us. This is what we can do. This is what we should do. It gives us a code of morals and ethics, right behavior. It gives us a way of clarifying things, clarifying the mind. And we'll come on to this when we study the second part of this book. And we're doing it conjointly with the introduction. And that is the vast commentary only on the second stanza or the second sutra thread of Patanjali. Just a mere suggestion based on discussions and teachings with sufficient words to give the person who has researched this and listened to this with a teacher understands the whole content of what went on in their discourse and their conversations. The teachers, says Swami Vivekananda, all saw God. They all saw their own souls. They saw their future. They saw their eternity. And what they saw, they preached. Only there is this difference, that by most of these religions, especially in modern times, he's speaking in the late 19th century, a peculiar claim is made, namely, that these experiences are impossible at present day. They were only possible for a few men in the past. It could only have happened to Muhammad or a Christ or a Buddha. But in these modern times, it doesn't happen. This is a great error. They were only possible with a few men who were the first founders of the religions that subsequently bore their names. And at the present time, these experiences have become obsolete. And therefore, we have now to take religion on belief. Now this, he says, I entirely deny. If there has been one experience in this world in any particular branch of knowledge, it absolutely follows that that experience has been possible millions of times before and will be repeated eternally. Unfortunately, is the rigorous uniformity. Uniformity is the rigorous law of nature. What once happened can happen always. We can add to it in this way. A second axiom will be, what happens on a small scale, what happens in a microcosmic environment, happens in the macrocosmic environment. Do we have an example of this? Yes. General relativity is an example of this. Understanding there was a principle somewhere, starting from a thought experiment. It was tested in the whole universe, the latest being the evidence of gravitational waves predicted by Einstein, who said, I doubt if we will ever detect these. It's all theory. But if the principle holds true and you have the correct equipment, you can, I'm sure you'll find them. And certainly some years ago, with various very, very sensitive detectors, they managed to discover these supposedly effects of supposedly two black holes, whatever it was, some cosmic event, and they predicted, okay, can we feel these waves? Why should they be waves? Because the universe, according to Einstein, is something like an interwoven texture of space and time, a space-time continuum, like a fabric, the fabric of space and time. Same language is used in the Upanishads. Like warp and woof, like a fabric, one thread this way, another thread this way, and interwoven to make a material. And this is exactly how Einstein understood it. Therefore, it's a little bit like a flexible sheet of rubber that if you vibrate it on one side, there's a ripple effect everywhere, and you should be able to detect it if you have sufficient sensitive instruments. It was a remarkable detection. And so Einstein and his general relativity was once more proven true. But you see, it takes a certain amount of faith that this person knows what they're talking about, that the theory is sound, but it has to be followed by experimentation. And so uniformity not only is the rigorous law of nature, what once happened can always happen, but by escalating, extrapolating, as Einstein did, from the microcosm to the macrocosm and say, if it happens here, it must happen everywhere. One particular point of interest for you is that the ancient rishis had a cosmological model which was a rotating universe. And it's a possibility not really fully explored because very difficult to find evidence for such a thing. But we know that the weak nuclear forces actually have a bias, and so that they violate the law of parity. There used to be a law of parity, which has now been upset. Parity means you can't have any preferred direction. And if you do, that suggests there must be an axis. Yes, the ancient rishis said there was an axis and a rotating universe. And my speculation might be this, that if it happened on a tiny scale of the weak nuclear forces, then at some point or other we may discover it everywhere and may already have discovered it. Now, if you're really interested, I'll give you a small example without going into too much scientific detail. There was a Nobel Prize that was offered, or it was given, to people who discovered that the expansion of the universe, which should be slowing down after a big bang, you have a big explosion, the fragments will have to go and settle down gently, and the universe will all settle down and start slowing down and maybe start disappearing. Maybe that's the destiny of the universe. But what did they find to their shock? By measuring what they call standard candles, supernova, right in the distance, they were able to say, oh, our calculation tells us, and we don't like it, the universe is accelerating. What to do about it? Well, there must be something that's forcing it into that condition. We call this dark energy. We have no idea what it is. But we'll make sure that over 70% of the universe is this dark energy. And along with so-called dark matter, we have no idea what it is. But what it means, the visible universe consisting of billions and billions and billions of galaxies and billions of stars within those galaxies. 100 billion is the estimate, maybe 200 billion galaxies, maybe a few hundred billion stars within the galaxies, vaster than you can ever imagine. And so all of this expansion. It's expanding. It's actually accelerating. And that's what we see, these billions and billions of universes or galaxies or stars is only 4% of what is there. We're only seeing tables and chairs, only 4% of what is there. Imagine, that's the scientific speculation at the moment. About 25% dark matter. And dark matter means we have no idea what it is. Dark energy, we have no idea what it is. Now you see, dark energy, if the universe is expanding at an accelerated rate, you have to have something that drives it. And there are models which can explain it. But this is now part of what is called the lambda cold dark matter model, which says, okay, this universe is expanding at an accelerated rate, and there's this dark energy, mysterious thing that is pushing it. Some dark devil is making it expand. But recent discoveries say something different. The data was all released that the Nobel Prize winners got, was all re-released in 2014. And what they did was they found that the data was adjusted in order to accommodate an outdated theory that has no scientific basis, namely that the universe is the same in every direction. You want the universe to be the same in every direction because you don't want the Earth to be the center of the universe. And Copernicus said, no, it's all revolving around the sun. Prior to that, it was geocentric. Even now it's geocentric because it's nighttime coming up and people have this phrase, to look up in the sky. And I encourage people to say, no, please look down in the sky. You get a much better perspective because from the outside the Earth's environment, there's no up, there's no down. Up in the sky is not only a geocentric position, it's an egocentric position. And the Australians will disagree with you because they're all upside down. Our up is their down. So how can you say up or down, really? And why am I saying all this? Because if we want to discover the truth, we have to learn to shift our position radically. And we have tools to do it. The whole of the Vedanta philosophy gives you a range of tools. And so during the conference in Switzerland, I said at one point, I don't believe the modern theory of evolution. The yogis have a much better theory called the flow theory. I call it the flow theory. And later in Patanjali Sutras, you'll see that good and bad deeds are not the direct causes of transformations. And it's compared to water being held back with obstacles in the way. And all we have to do is remove the obstacles. And in another place in the Jnana Yoga lectures, Swami Vivekananda puts it like this, that out of all of these things, so you mentioned it earlier on, that all our experience is direct experience. All our memory is to do with experience. This is the yogic philosophy, the psychology of yoga. Now, what is our experience? Well, if we take the evolutionary theory correctly, the observation of things seem to be transforming in a sequence, a fossil record that indicates step 1, step 2, step 3, some transformations taking place, accelerated in the Cambrian period and so on, that's fine. So it means that if you are a biologist, you say, in the beginning we were a bacteria, they will say. In the beginning we were 1 micron by half a micron, and we discovered that it's much better for our survival to form a cooperative and make a multicellular organism and work together and make a multicellular organizer called a brain. And then work on like that. And every time you advance, you're removing an obstacle until finally the monkeys or the apes, they removed, the obstacle of monkey was removed, out jumped man, says Swami Vivekananda. And when man is removed, out comes God. But that was in the beginning. And I used an example that I often use here. I folded a piece of paper. And I said, you see this piece of paper? Let me unfold it for you. Evolution means unfolding. You didn't get anything new. It's the same paper. What was there in the beginning has to be there in the end. It's a law of conservation. You can't get anything new. But the law of conservation, physics hold. And biologists have their own science, and they don't listen to the physicists. That's the problem. There has to be a law of conservation. All right, and the physicists don't listen to the biologists. If things evolve, why shouldn't the laws of physics also evolve? Why should they be immutably fixed? Unquestionably, you assume it as a dogma, which means that some aspect of modern science is as dogmatic as religion. And no matter about this condition of testability or this falsifiability, we still have the pet theory and go on and on and on and on, looking for dark matter, looking for dark energy. Now, the modern discovery, reviewing all this data and abandoning the idea things don't necessarily have to be isotropic or heterogeneous everywhere. They don't have to be the same everywhere. They don't have to be the same temperature. There was no reason for it in the first place. It's 100 years old. You don't use something that is 100 years or 50 years old even in science. You learn some new things, particularly if there's no reason behind it. When they adjusted the data, what did they find? The original measurements were being measured in one direction only. And in that one direction, they were assuming there was an acceleration. No doubt it's there. But in the opposite direction, it's decelerating. So they say that we are caught in a local movement, some kind of local movement, like a kind of body that moves and leaves, like an airplane jet that leaves a stream behind it. Maybe we're caught up in this. But what we know is the universe is not even in all directions, it's clumpy. And now if you look some way, way beyond the range of galaxies and solar systems and so on and so forth, as far as we can see, what we find? We find vast bodies of galaxies that should not be there. And the anomaly is statistically impossible. If you say it's isotropic, it's just an unusual occurrence. No, it cannot be. And these are 4 billion light years across, and so on, these vast bodies, they should not be there. The universe is clumpy. It is not isotropic. It is not homogeneous. So this is the problem. Now, why am I saying all this? Perhaps, if we shift our thinking and prepare to accept change, perhaps the ancient rishis were correct. Perhaps it's a rotating universe with an axis. Perhaps it's accelerating in one direction and not in the other. Perhaps that is it. Perhaps there's an axis after all. Perhaps there's a violation of the law of parity. Perhaps that law is just an assumption. So we have to take up an interest in where we live and take up an interest in who we are. And this is the science of religion, where we question our own existence and are prepared to accept evidence of direct experience firsthand. So the teachers of the science of yoga, says Swami Vivekananda, therefore declare that religion is not only based upon the experience of ancient times, but that no man can be religious until he has the same perceptions himself. A remarkable statement, because today, just as in his day, there are those who declare exclusivity in their religion. My religion is true. And what does Swami Vivekananda say? Exactly what Sri Ramakrishna said, his master. So many faiths, so many...
As many paths.
As many paths. Okay. We all have a different path. Why not? But our experience may be different according to the journey, just as if you climb a mountain, you may have a different approach with different flora and fauna on either side and a different view. Somebody climbs the south face, a different view. Somebody climbs the north face, a different view. But the view of totality is the same. So in a spirit of fun, I then, on a different occasion, told the audience, you see, I don't believe in evolution. And I looked for the shock on their faces. And I said, I know, I told you all about evolution and how the flow theory of evolution is a much better theory that the yogis have than the biologists have. But I cannot believe in evolution because I believe in totality. We have to be able to shift our position and the interests of direct experience and the interests of clear-mindedness, objective investigation. And so there is this science of Raja Yoga, the science of religion, which is a true investigation. What is the reality? Start off with no map, no compass, only the testimony, credible testimony of those who've gone before us. And even then we don't fully accept it until we have verified it with our own experience. This is what the great Ramakrishna did, and why we say that Ramakrishna's experience was unique. You seldom say it, but I'm saying it now, is because he did the whole range of experiments using the laboratory of his own mind and researched every system thoroughly, including Christianity and Islam. He was curious enough to say, maybe it's true. I wonder if it's true. If it's true, then I should be able to experience it for myself. And that is why I think he very much liked the question that Swami Vivekananda, who later became Swami Vivekananda, said, "So have you seen God?" It is testimony to the boldness of Narayan at the time. Have you seen God? And testimony to the truth of the validator, Ramakrishna. And therefore, okay, then I'll listen to you, I'll follow you, and I'll test you, of course, at every corner, whether you did directly experience as you say you did, or whether you're just a madman. Let us find it out. So yoga, says Swami Vivekananda continuing, is the science which teaches us how to get these perceptions. It is not much use to talk about religion until one has felt it. Why is there so much disturbance, so much fighting and quarreling in the name of God? There's been more bloodshed. There's a very famous statement, stated, of course, before the last two world wars. There's been more bloodshed in the name of God than for any other cause, because people never went to the fountainhead. They were content only to give a mental assent to the customs of their forefathers and wanted others to do the same. What right has a man to say he has a soul if he doesn't feel it? Or that there is a God if he doesn't see him? If there is a God, we must see him. If there is a soul, we must perceive it. Otherwise, it is better not to believe. And in my careless youth, when I came across, and all over the world, you'll find people on the streets, maybe near the post office in Dublin, you might find some people on a soapbox, and they ask you to convert to their religion, and have you seen Christ, and do you want to see Christ, and all the rest of it, and believe in the Bible, as if, the Bible. I said to one person, you see, I put my ear very closely to the Bible, and I never heard a word, because you keep saying the Bible says this, the Bible says that. So you see, one question I used to ask, it's not recommended that you make these discussions. I said, well, because I had heard this in my youth, have you seen God? And invariably they couldn't say yes, you see. And I said, of course I'll sit and listen to you if you have. Let me know, So it is better, says Swami Vivekananda, or he goes on to say, if there is a God, we must see him, and so on. Otherwise, it's better not to believe. It is better to be an outspoken atheist than a hypocrite. And this is so valid in today's world. And this is why religion is being questioned, you see, because hypocrisy, the hypocrisy is now very, very evident in many, many of the religions. The modern idea, on the one hand, with the learned, is that religion and metaphysics and all search after a supreme being are futile. He's talking in his day, but it's exactly the same in today. On the other hand, with the semi-educated, the idea seems to be that these things really have no basis. Their only value consists in the fact that they furnish strong motive powers for doing good to the world. Some people say religions are all superstition, but they're not doing any harm because as long as they're there, it encourages people to be good. Well, that's not a valid argument at all. So they may become good and moral and so make good citizens. But you see, this is only maintenance. I'm a good person, I have no need for God. Well, that's just maintenance. Of course, you should be a good person. All humans should be good people, regardless of whether they're theists, atheists, or agnostics. That's only maintenance. But if you want to go to the moral training of spiritual life, then you're adding a new dimension. You're now evolving something from within. You're unfolding yourself. You're entering into a stage of inner spiritual growth. Anyway, Swami Vivekananda says we cannot blame them for holding such ideas. Seeing that all the teaching these men get is simply to believe in an eternal rigmarole of words without any substance behind them. They are asked to live upon words. Can they do it? If they could, I should not have the least regard for human nature. Man wants truth, wants to experience truth for himself. And when he has grasped it, realized it, felt it within his heart of hearts, then alone, declare the Vedas, would all doubts vanish, all darkness be scattered, and all crookedness be made straight. Ye children of immortality, he quotes the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. Ye children of immortality, even those who live in the highest sphere, the way is found. There is a way out of all this darkness, and that is by perceiving him who is beyond all darkness. There is no other way. And then he goes on, the science of Raja Yoga proposes to put before humanity a practical and scientifically worked out method of reaching this truth. In the first place, every science must have its own method of investigation. And if you want to become an astronomer and sit down and cry, astronomy, 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 it will never come to you. The same with chemistry. A certain method must be followed. You must go to a laboratory, take different substances, mix them, compound them, experiment with them, and out of that will come a knowledge of chemistry. If you want to be an astronomer, you must go to the observatory, take a telescope, study the stars and planets, and then you'll become an astronomer. Each science must have its own methods. I could preach you thousands of sermons, but they would not make you religious until you practiced the method. And in this day and age, it's quite popular, particularly at academic institutions, to have theist-atheist debates and then take a vote which one you think is more plausible. Does God exist? Does God not exist? And so on and so forth, you see. But you see, supposing you said to somebody, okay, I want to validate, you need to validate the existence of a deity or a supreme being, but you will need to do a process. Well, how many people would do that process? And the process Patanjali lays out is an eightfold process. It's the same process of all religions, and that is provide a sound moral and ethical basis. In Judaism, it's the 10 Commandments. Moses gave us some formula. The Yoga Patanjali Sutras reduces everything to 5 principles called controls. How to control yourself. Once you make a control, you see, you have the language controlled experiments. So how to make a controlled experiment? The first thing you have to do is engage in 5 universal moral principles, objective moral values that are applicable to everybody, everywhere. There are many, many excuses to break these moral principles. And warfare will be an excuse to break one of them, which is ahimsa, non-violence. It's a very, very high moral ideal, because it's not just non-violence, but don't even think about it, because every action is preceded by a thought. In thought, word, and deed, do no harm to any creature, never mind humans, to no being. But then does that make you a kind of doormat? Does it make you weak? Does it make you the victim of people's taking advantage of your good nature? And so we have to balance that. And the philosophy does it. Because none of these principles work without the philosophy. Because the opposite side of ahimsa, non-injury, is love. But what's the basis of love? Why should I love? There should be a reason for it. Why should I not be something like a utilitarian or consequentialist? I get on with everybody. I have no thought of violence. I don't make war with anybody on the basis that I'm socially conditioned to be a sociable person, get on with everybody, then we all benefit. Just something like that, a social structure. But that's not love. There's no reason for it. And why should you not do the greatest harm, says Swami Vivekananda, mentioning these kinds of people, utilitarianism, if it serves your purpose. What's the reason? Why should you be good? So the whole evolutionary process of struggle, as it is in some biological interpretations of evolution, competition and struggle. Nature is your enemy. You have to bite and fight and scratch and overcome it. This is what you have to do. But this doesn't apply to man. If you bite and fight and scratch, find out your best species, mate, you'll create a super species. And they will continue the species, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work with humans. So people fall in love and they get married and they go to the bridal suite, and on honeymoon night, she plunges at him and he plunges toward her. They fight and they bite and they scratch, and they mate and they have a super child. No, it doesn't work like that. You know how it works. Soft candlelight is required, and all these other things, devices, are required. And a spirit of generosity, a spirit of love has to be engendered. And this love cannot be selfish in any way. And the highest version of this will be a spirit of service, love, and generosity working for the welfare of all beings. No other species does it. Only man has the capacity to do it. Only man has the capacity to transform this discord into harmony and be truly altruistic. Why? It's not in the interest of survival. If it was, Jesus would be a failure. Being a celibate person, never having children, being concerned about his diet, and living a life of strict self-control, he would have been a complete evolutionary failure. Same thing with Buddha, same thing with any great person. They are not following the formula. So that there's a difference. There's somehow some difference in man. And so Patanjali lays out these 5 principles. Non-injury is a negative term. It is this love on the other side, on the basis of what? On the basis that even in a utilitarian way, there's only one thing, there's one unity. And like the Sankhyas, yogis are generous enough to put all the fragmented differentiation in the universe into one category called Prakriti, or nature. Anyway, continuing now with Swami Vivekananda, he says, they all declare that they have found some truth higher than what the senses can bring to us, and they invite verification. They ask us to take up the method and practice honestly, and then, if we do not find this higher truth, we will have the right to say that there is no truth in the claim. You see, it's a scientific process. But before we have done that, we are not rational in denying the truth of their assertions until we have verified everything. So we must work faithfully using the prescribed methods, and light will come. And in acquiring knowledge, we make use of generalizations. And generalization is based upon observation. We first observe the facts and then generalize. And this is the scientific method. And then we draw conclusions or principles. The knowledge of this inferential approach to verification, the knowledge of the mind, of the internal nature of man, of thought, can never be had until we have the power of observing the facts that are going on within. The first understanding in modern science is in terms of methodology, is observation. You have to observe the facts. And once you've observed the facts, then you can see how you can interpret these facts. And so Swami Vivekananda is simply following the same scientific formula. It's comparatively easy to observe facts in the external world, for many instruments have been invented for the purpose. But in the internal world, we have no instrument to help us. Yet we know we must observe in order to have a real science, and without a proper analysis, any science will be hopeless. Mere theorizing. That is why all the psychologists have been quarreling among themselves since the beginning of time, except those few who found out the means of observation. Now we have an instrument called attention. We can observe where it goes, and we can direct it. And the fact that we are able to observe the comings and goings within the various strata of the mental field means that we are not the mental field, and we therefore have the capacity to control it. We are not asked to control something that is beyond our control. And so Swami Vivekananda continues, the science of Raja Yoga, in the first place, proposes to give us such a means of observing the internal states. The instrument is the mind itself, the power of attention, and when properly guided and directed towards the internal world, will analyze the mind and illumine facts for us. And so I'm going to leave it at that, but I wanted to highlight something there from the second sutra. And I won't refer to the commentary except to put it like this. We have to understand, in order to understand these principles and how to control the mind, we have to understand the workings of the mind and the nature of the mind. And so how do we structure our behavior in such a way that this control comes about? So what we call mind, according to the yogis, is called chitta. It's really not mind in any detail, it's a mind stuff. It is the same stuff as any other stuff, but very subtle. And so this localized version of consciousness is called chitta, and derived from the same roots as the word for consciousness, understanding. And consciousness is of two types: objective external consciousness, or external observed consciousness, and internal subjective consciousness. The internal subjective consciousness we can put in a very simple language. It is the knower. And how we know the objective consciousness or the objective world is through a consciousness that can be observed, called awareness. We know when we are attentive to something and when we are not. And this can vacillate. Everybody has the capacity to shift their attention. And so the other day I gave that example of being able to shift our attention very quickly. Simplest example is this. Supposing I'm talking here in the hall and there's a big accident outside, evidently a crash. Now we have an interpretive faculty whereby our experience, our memory registers, oh, that sounds like two vehicles colliding. It has a certain sound. Another sound will be if a mortar gets set off, that's another sound. Our experience will identify very quickly. Oh, I think, you say, I think there's an accident outside. Well, the first thing was you heard it, and immediately the attention went toward it. And maybe you'd run to the window, or maybe you'd go outside. What became of my speech? Supposing I'm immune to that, and I'm so immersed into my talk, I continue talking, unaware that you've all left, and I have become not much interested in what I have to say. It's much more entertaining to see two cars collide and see what happens there. So you see, and hopefully nobody is hurt, of course. That would be your concern as well. Our attention can shift very easily, and has done so from childhood, and has done so from previous lives, and has kept us in survival mode, keeping us alert with our ears, keeping us alert with our sense of smell, looking everywhere for potential energies or enemies, and this has kept us going. And the biological section of humanity is no different, just more sophisticated, because we attach to it pleasure. In other words, the attention moves towards something that attracts us. And in this modern day and age, where we walk around doing many kinds of thumb exercises on telephones, and where we have technology at our fingertips, the attention gets very easily distracted. And this was unknown of in Swami Vivekananda's time, and was unknown of in Patanjali's time. The level of modern technology has made it even more a scattered mechanism for taking our mind everywhere. And so in this day and age, we have to be even more disciplined and cautious in terms of our concentration. Anyway, this citta modifies itself in different ways, and we have to understand this. So I gave an example that was given by Swami Prabhavananda in a book. So I'm standing in a field, and I register there's an object there, and I consult my library, my field of experience, and my experience tells me, oh, the librarian comes back and says, well, it seems to be a large object. This large object is a bull. And you happen to be wearing a red shirt. And the next thing is, it seems to be moving. Yes, it's running. And then there's a report to that component of the mind called aham, sense of I, a kind of coordinator. And it says, oh, I see, it's running toward me. And then the discerning faculty, the discriminative faculty called the intellect, says, yes, this seems to be the case, so let me find a tree and let me climb up the tree. Let me do it quickly because I have just assessed the rate at which the bull is attacking me. And I assess that I'm going to have to move quickly. I can't leave it till tomorrow. So this is a kind of step by step in a process of the mind. The mind has these various faculties, and within this mind are the three evolutionary forces that are same in the entire universe according to the Sankhya's. And these we call the gunas. You're all aware of them, but I'm reminding you of them. So these gunas, these evolutionary forces, they appear as, in the mental field anyway, as laziness, inertia, lethargy. And then in another mood, great enthusiasm, a wish to pursue goals and objectives, a wish to be active, a wish to do things. But unfortunately, both of these aspects have self-interest involved. And it is the self-interest that acts as a trap. It keeps the mind in a disturbed condition. And then a third wave comes. We can consider these as waves. And a third wave comes along, which is a wave of equilibrium, whose characteristic is selflessness, no egoistic interest. Higher values of beauty and truth and goodness and love and harmony and peace. All of these values coming up. And then we have to play a game. This is the game of self-control. We have to make sure that sattva is a neutralizing wave to these two other categories of waves, which we call rajas and tamas. And this is the technique. If we don't understand this, we will misunderstand the second sutra held by Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras. You know, yoga chitta vritti nirodha. And so, for this reason, Swami Vivekananda gives an immense commentary. I'm not going to go through all the commentary because of shortness of time, but suffice to say, we have to understand what chitta is and what these waves are, which are formerly called vrittis. I have eyes, eyes do not see. Take away the brain center, which is in the head, and the eyes will still be there. The retinue complete has also the pictures of objects on them. He goes on like that. And so, going along this, he walks through the geography of the mind. First, he says there is the instrument, and then there is the organ, and third, the mind attached to these. So, in terms of what is the mind and what is this internal instrument called antahkarana, the senses are the first faculty of the mind, of this internal instrument. And they are not the external organs that we have. These are the internal instruments. And when the eyes go down and the eyelids just, start lowering, because the sun lowers and the eyes lower with it, the eyelids lower, and sleep comes in. And during that phase of dream, we still see objects. We still hear things, because the internal organs are still replaying. It's not the eyeball that sees. When a person sleeps, somebody can open the eyelid, the eyeball stares out at you horrifically. But the eyeball is not seeing. Attention is required. So this faculty of attention is a necessary part of this internal instrument. And it is this that has to be directed. There's a receptive faculty where the emotional mind is as well, called manas, a kind of reception area that coordinates memories and so on. Is a vast portion of the mind, much of it in the unconscious. And this presents the facts to the discerning faculty, which appears to be an executive officer and a coordinating officer for our purposes called an ego. And as we go on, we discover that all of these things are lit from within. And it is this inner light that we want to discover through purification of the mind. So we leave it there. We'll pick this up next Tuesday and go on from there and continue with Swami Vivekananda's commentary on the one side and the Patanjali Yoga Sutras on the other. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.
Good morning, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you, Swamiji.